Honorable Kenneth E. Mapp, the Governor, and Lieutenant Governor Osbert Potter. Also very honorable. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Please be seated. We're here this afternoon, if I may. Let me get myself a little bit situated here first. We're here this afternoon because of the action taken by the 31st Legislature and actually several other announcements that we had planned to make today. On behalf of the Lieutenant Governor and myself, we first want to begin by apologizing to the senior citizens on St. John. We had expected to host a reception there today, as we did on St. Thomas yesterday, and expected to do on St. Croix tomorrow. But given the crisis caused by the lack of Senate action today, we have no choice but to come before you and address the issues. As everyone in the Virgin Islands is aware, the legislature had difficulty in forwarding and approving and ratifying a number of our nominations for the cabinet. And members of the legislature indicated that their concerns were driven by the change in salary for those positions between the Young Franciscan administration and the Mapp Potter administration when we began on January the 5th. A number of members of the legislature all members of the legislature met with the Lieutenant Governor and I on at least two occasions. One when they voted to hold the nominees the first time, and subsequently we had almost a full day work session at Government House St. Croix where we discussed many issues, but also discussed the issues of the setting of the salaries for the cabinet. I want to just state for the record that the Section 11 of the revised Organic Act reposes in the Governor of the Virgin Islands the full and unfettered discretion and authority to set salaries of the unclassified service of the executive branch of government. This discretion and authority is no different than the legislature and the president of the legislature having full and unfettered authority to set the salaries of employees of the legislature of the Virgin Islands and or the presiding judge of the Superior Court and Supreme Court, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the Virgin Islands, having full and unfettered authority to set salaries within those branches of government. This is long established in our history of separation of powers and of the independent branches of government. That being said, on our initial discussion with the legislature, we indicated that the net cost of the change in salaries from one administration to the other approximated $250,000. We created and established these pay grades within the budget that the legislature has authorized and for which the budget director has allotted. We did it by eliminating positions in some departments and agencies, and instituting an additional 5% allotment reduction to the department and agencies. To achieve this, these salaries, we have not asked, nor do we seek, any additional funding from the legislative branch of government. And it is well established that I have repeated time and time again that we want the best in our cabinet. We have sought the best in our cabinet, and we have found a bevy of Virgin Islanders who are educated, trained, experienced, and have demonstrated in their careers their ability to assist us in moving and improving the quality of lives of the people of the Virgin Islands forward and building and expanding our economy and constructing a stable and growing positive financial environment for the public sector. Now, the members of the legislature, I suspect rightfully so, continues to refer to my comments in the State of the Territory message on January 26th that we found a government teetering on the brink of bankruptcy. And I stand by that statement. However, today is May the 28th. And as I have said to the members of the legislature, the Lieutenant Governor and I, and have repeated publicly, I once again say that from January 26th to May 28th, with the nominees that have been managing the departments and agencies of the government of the Virgin Islands, this is a brief summary of what we have done. Since January 26th, when we assumed office in January 5th, there is no dispute that there were no tax refunds being paid to anyone in the Virgin Islands. Since January 5th, January 26th more specifically, the Mapp administration, through our financial team headed by Commissioner Valdemar Collins, we have paid over $12.5 million, meaning we have actually released to the public in the last 4 months $12.5 million in tax refunds. Currently, at the Department of Finance, the department is processing an additional $5 million to release to the public over the course of the next 10 days. We said to the community, as we said to the legislature, that we began issuing tax refunds at a rate of $750,000 a month. We were able to go to $1 million a month, $1.5 million a month, and that our target is to arrive at $4.2 million. So in 4 months, we are gone from no tax refunds to the people of the territory to, in the next 10 days, $17.8 million. In addition to that, 416 employees of the government of the Virgin Islands, when we assumed office, had been waiting at least 9 to 2 years to receive their retirement annuity, and the GERS indicated that they could not pay any of those annuities because the government owed them money. This cabinet, this administration, the folks that are before the legislature waiting for confirmation, has been able to pay $2.1 million to the government employees retirement system, and over 90% of those 400 plus government employees are currently receiving their retirement annuity. In addition, we knew when we accepted, and we said to the public on January 5th, in our State of the Territory message on January 26th, that no payments were being made to injured employees in the territory, private or public sector, under the Workmen Compensation Program, and no payments to their medical service providers were being made because the Workmen's Compensation Fund had been in arrears. In the last 4 months, we have been able to distribute and release under the Workmen's Compensation Fund an additional $1.2 million to injured employees in the territory and to pay bills to their medical service providers. And so while on January 26, we said to you, the community, that we accepted a government teetering on the brink of bankruptcy, we did not go back to our agencies and twiddle our thumbs. We got together as a financial team, as an administration. We understood the priorities and the affect to the basic quality of life of our citizens, and we have taken action and are demonstrating our ability to meet the needs and the obligations to the people of this territory. We inherited an administration that, for budgetary reasons, closed senior citizen centers throughout the territory to a mere 2 days a week. We announced that we would correct that, and we have done so. We are providing senior citizen services 5 days a week. We are providing lunch to our senior citizens, and beginning June 15th, we are going to also give the seniors an option to receive breakfast. We said to you then that we would be hiring and have been hiring up to 22 additional individuals to work the senior citizen program, as well as purchase 4 bus transportations in the territory for the Senior Citizen Center. So that in 4 months, while we were teetering on the brink of bankruptcy for a government that we have accepted, this administration have been functioning and dealing with the issues and the resources in this territory to provide services to the people of the Virgin Islands. We have reported, Nellen Bowery, our budget director nominee, reported to the legislature that we had been collecting additional monies and that the current fiscal year deficit that we had been incurring, in addition to these outlays, have been reduced by an additional $22 million. That's a reduction in the current year fiscal year deficit. Tomorrow we will be releasing the fiscal 2016-27 budget for the government of the Virgin Islands, which is estimated, and you will see, the senators will see, would be at $1.267 billion. And so the legislature's action today, by not, as you know, on May 21st, I was off island, acting Governor Potter. We all recognize that the legislature voted not to approve the nominees, and the acting governor did get in touch with the Senate president, and the administration offered a compromise to cap pay for those nominees before the Senate who were in excess of $105,000 to $105,000. The media, you have already received the Senate president's letter where he thanked us for the offer of compromise and a step in the right direction. And in all of our conversations, we had anticipated that the Senate would have voted to reconsider the nominations and to approve them. The legislature and members of the legislature have, on time and time again, and it's in all of your media reports and the transcript at the legislature, the senators have been praising the nominees for their fine work. The senators have been praising the administration for our unfettered and giving them total access to the financial condition of this territory and the changes that we have been incurring and experiencing since we have taken over. Senators have brought in constituent service issues to the table and have sought the administration's assistance in helping them with those services, and rightfully so. We've directed and we have a policy that the commissioners and agency heads must respond timely to members of the legislature, and we have solved a number of the issues that the members of the legislatures have brought to the table. And so I am as perplexed and bewildered with the Senate's lack of action today other than to adjourn the session. In consideration of that, by adjourning the session, the opportunity for a reconsideration is lost. And so it is only a perfunctory document that I await from the Secretary of the Legislature to advise me that the nominees were voted down and rejected by the legislature. Today is Thursday. I don't know when that letter would arrive. And I can't wait for that letter to arrive to find myself heading a government where department and agency heads no longer exist, that may be occurring during the weekend with all number of issues that may occur. Now, I want to take the opportunity then to today announce a renewed nominations and appointments to the department and agencies for which the Senate has rejected. And I have signed the appropriate documents appointing these individuals as acting commissioners and directors, and signing the appropriate letters and signing the appropriate letters to the Senate President making the appointments. Let me indicate that when we created set the original salaries, we said that the net cost was $250,000. The compromise that we offered the legislature means now that the net cost of the compromise is a mere $91,000. I am committed to my cabinet members. They work hard, they get their job done, they understand our vision, we are proud to have them on board, and we want them to remain in our cabinet. In consideration of the legislature's concern about the cost of paying these commissioners, I will vacate the resident at Estate Nazareth that you know that we're paying some $12,500 a month on Saturday. I have made no decision with respect to where I should reside on the island of St. Thomas, and that is no longer or is not a priority of mine. On Sunday, I will be departing for Guam by invitation of the Department of Interior on a collaboration with all of the territorial governors except Puerto Rico, and I will be out of the territory for the next 12 days. And so upon my return, I will figure out where I may need to sleep where I am on the island of St. Thomas. But that's not my issue. The point being is that I will give up the residence and the cost of that residence so that any conversation now on the cost of moving forward and dealing with the issues affecting the people of the Virgin Islands, I am hopeful will be behind us. I start by advising, and they will just come and stand as I read their names, for the Acting Commissioner of the Department of Finance and the nominee for the Department of Finance. We are nominating Mr. Valdemar O. Collins as the Commissioner of the Department of Finance and submitting his name to the legislature. Joining Mr. Collins immediately on his right as Director of the Office of Management and Budget, as the Acting Director and the nominee for the Office of Management and Budget, we nominate Mr. Nellan Bowery. For the division and the Director of the Division of Personnel, we designate as the Acting Director of the Division of Personnel and nominate to head the Department of the Division of Personnel, Mr. Milton Potter. For the Acting Director of the Bureau of Internal Revenue, we appoint as Acting Director and nominate to fill the position of the Bureau of Internal Revenue, Mr. Marvin Pickering. To head the Department of Tourism and designate as the Acting Commissioner of Tourism, we nominate to the legislature Beverly Nicholson Doty. To head the Department of Public Works, we designate as the Acting Commissioner and the nominee for the Department of Public Works, Mr. Gustav James. To head the Department of Planning and Natural Resources, we designate as the Acting Commissioner of the Department of Planning and Natural Resources, Ms. Dawn Henry Esquire. To head the Department of Agriculture, we designate as the Acting Commissioner of the Department of Tourism and nominate Agriculture, and we nominate as the Commissioner of Agriculture, Mr. Carlos Robles. For the Department of Human Services, we designate as Acting Commissioner of the Department of Human Services and nominate as the Commissioner of the Department of Human Services, Mrs. Vivian Eberson Flood. To head the Virgin Islands Fire Services, we designate as Acting Director of the Virgin Islands Fire Services and nominate as Director of the Virgin Islands Fire Services, Mr. Eugene Farrell. To head the Department of Licensing and Consumer Affairs, we designate as Acting Commissioner of the Department of Licensing and Consumer Affairs and nominate Mr. Devin Carrington. I want to thank these fine folks for the work that they have been doing and continuing to do, and I want to thank them for their willingness to move and be a part of the compromise that we submitted to the legislature. The president of the legislature has asked, I called him, and we agreed that we would meet, and we expect to have that meeting tomorrow morning. And subsequently, the Senate President and I have also agreed to meet with the entire legislature following my return. I spoke to the Senate President around 9 a.m. this morning. There was some question with regard to meeting with members of the legislature. I contacted the Lieutenant Governor, and we agreed that we could do so. I advised the Senate President that we could meet at 11 a.m. The Senate President did indicate that he would get back to me in about 10 minutes or so to let me know the decision of his caucus, and the next decision literally was the decision of the Senate to adjourn. Let me be clear that the legislature has the right to exercise its discretions and authority as it sees fit. So I'm making no judgment with respect to their actions, but our responsibility, the Lieutenant Governor and mine, are reposed on the executive branch of government, and I want the Virgin Islands community to be assured that during the next 180 days, this act begins the clock of new, that these individuals will be serving as the head of the department and agencies, and we hope to be able to work out any remaining issues with members of the legislature and to establish to the people of the Virgin Islands we are now neutral. In point of fact, we are now negative because we removed salaries and positions from many of these departments and agencies, and we have not filled them. These salaries were $80,000, $90,000, $75,000, and we have not filled them. So we are operating, and it is important for the public to understand, we are operating within the authorized allotments granted to us and the authorized expenditures as approved by the legislature. And I hope that we can put this matter behind us and move forward. I want to thank you, good ladies and gentlemen, for being with the administration and being willing to stand with the administration. We thank you for the service that you are doing, and I've asked each of the agency heads and commissioners to become a little bit more vocal with the community about the programs that they are working on and the things that their departments and agencies are doing within their agencies. Nelson Bowery testified to the legislature during his confirmation hearing that this administration is moving towards a multi-year budgetary system, a system that will create and provide for continued annual increases in the pay of government workers. This is our plan to bring the territory on a sound financial footing and move forward so that the issues of simply trying to give people raises in an election year, provide them retroactive pay in an election year, and then the following year lay off 1,800 of them and have the Senate vote to cut their pay by 8% is not acceptable, and it should not be done to our workers. And so Mr. Potter and I, Lieutenant Governor Potter and I, we want to move from that methodology and from that way of operating. And it is these fine men and women with their acumen, their skill, their experience, and their training will get us to a place that we can speak to the heads of our unions and our government workers, classified and unclassified, to ensure that they receive a living wage in the territory. So, Lieutenant Governor Potter and I thank you tremendously for your service. Yes. We also, yes. We also, because I know we're live, we're going to make a new announcement of a new agency head today, and I would like to make this announcement to the people of the Virgin Islands. As you know, General Ronaldo Rivera is reaching retirement age this summer and must leave the Virgin Islands National Guard. Lieutenant Governor Potter and I take this opportunity today to announce our nominee for the new Adjutant General for the Virgin Islands National Guard and the first female Adjutant General and the first African-American female Adjutant General in the United States of America, Colonel Deborah Howell. Could you come, Colonel Howell? Good afternoon. Thank you. We want to welcome Colonel Howell, who will be Brigadier General Howell, and we are making the nomination, and I will be forwarding that to the legislature this afternoon and forwarding it to the Department of Defense, the National Guard Bureau, so that the beginning of the National Guard Bureau process can begin and that we have a smooth and orderly transition from one Adjutant General to the next. The Lieutenant Governor and I met with our short list, and I'm not going to name all the folks that were on the short list, but we had an additional meeting with Colonel Howell today and thanked her for her meeting, and we sat, both the Lieutenant Governor and I, and talked through the nominees or the candidates for the office and decided unanimously that Deborah Howell should serve as the next Adjutant General of the Virgin Islands National Guard. And you will see that her military experience is vast. She has worked as the Executive Assistant to the Adjutant General, the Director of the Information Systems, the Chief of the Joint Staff, the Assistant United States Property and Fiscal Officer, the Director of Logistics, the National Guard Bureau Logistics Officer, and many other positions, and received tremendous awards and accolades for her work. We have provided a resume to the media outlining Colonel Howell's background, and we trust that any questions that you have that you would ask. So that we thank you very much, Colonel, for your willingness to serve, and we look forward to welcoming you soon to the administration. Okay, at this time, I think I've covered it all. So at this time, I'm going to ask if there are any questions.
Good day, sir. Jonathan Austin with the Daily News.
Yes, good day.
How do you connect the rent for the villa with the appointment or rejection of the nominees? Because the position of Government House has been that the villa is not paid with by tax dollars.
Well, the members of the legislature, at least one or two of them that I heard, talked about the cost of the villa as the continuing additional cost to the people of the territory. And while the cost of the villa is borne out of one of our private entities owned by the people of the Virgin Islands, the point I am trying to demonstrate here is that I am prepared to make sacrifices in furtherance of the cabinet. I am a true believer in the members of our cabinet and the issues that the members of the Senate must deal with, I suspect, and answer in the community. I am trying to make a path forward. And I knew that from your paper and a number of the conversations in the community, the mere fact that I was staying at this villa and doing what is need to be done at the villa in terms of entertaining and what have you, has been a sticking point for the community. So I am saying that personally, without having a home, and I suspect I may now be the governor in the nation that does not have a home in the capital, in the jurisdiction in which he resides or she resides. That's not a big priority for me. When I ran for this office, I ran for this office because of a vision and a passion about the welfare and the well-being of the people of the Virgin Islands. I bought my private home on St. Croix in 2001. I live currently in my private home on St. Croix. I have asked the government for no additions, no security parameters, no cameras or anything around my private property. It isn't my fault that Katrinburg was not maintained in a manner that allowed me to stay there. I did not cause that issue. The Revised Organic Act requires that the governor shall reside in the capital of the Virgin Islands, known as Charlotte Amalie. I had somewhere that I needed to be, that not only that I can lay my head, but can also entertain folks senators, heads of federal agencies that come to the territory, and entertaining could be a dinner to talk about additional transportation funds for our highways. I will figure out when I return from Guam what's the next course of action. The point I want to make, sir, is that it isn't my priority. It doesn't matter to me. I could sleep on St. Croix and fly to work every day and fly home at the end of the day, and I would be just as happy. Next question, please. Yes. Yes, Lee Carl.
I noticed you mentioned the budget is that for 2016, $1.26 billion?
That's correct. The budget for 2016-2017 that the legislature will receive tomorrow, literally, I've signed the budget message, would be a compilation of a number of funds, and that total will be $1,267.6 million.
Just a question then. With the, you haven't, maybe too premature to say this, but will the final agreement between the Senate and yourself on the pay be included in that budget?
Well, the pay is in the budget, Lee, and that's the point we keep making. The legislature in the 2015-16 approved a budget. The legislature does not set by law the salaries of unclassified workers in the executive branch. The legislature passed a budget for the operations of the executive branch. And in the budget, we made a determination in trying to attract the candidates we felt were important to achieving the vision that we laid out in our campaign, that we would provide compensation at a particular level. The net effect of that compensation was a mere $254,000. The legislature continued to have issues with it. We could get in a back and forth and a stalemate about the separation of powers, but we choose not to do that. And so in the furtherance of moving the nominees forward, on May the 21st, the acting governor sent a letter after a long conversation with the Senate President, conversations with myself, conversations with the head of our departments and agencies, some of them. We sent a letter that the acting governor signed with an extension of an offer of compromise. That offer of compromise moves the cost from $250,000 to $91,000. Now, let me put that in comparison, and I'm not making mischief here. The legislature's own report to the Virgin Islands Daily News on the cost of their installation in office was $117,000. I am saying to pay financiers, social scientists, engineers in the government to provide and run and manage departments and agencies within the budgets that the legislature has already authorized to the executive branch, we're going to spend some $91,000. In putting an additional willingness of effort to say that I do share, I don't understand the legislature's rationale at this point, but in furthering the movement of the nominees, I will accept the status of being the homeless governor on St. Thomas and remove myself from the Nazareth Bay residence until we can come up with a solution that appears acceptable to the community. Next question, Ms. Schimmel.
Good afternoon.
Good
Governor
afternoon.
And Lieutenant Governor. I'm Judy Schimmel. I'm a reporter for the St. Croix Avis. I believe I heard you make some reference to some adjustments your administration was willing to make in the budget process coming up to address the lower pay scale for government workers.
Yes, what we're saying is that, and what we discussed through the budget director with the legislature, is that we cannot continue to tackle the financial situation of the government in a piecemeal 12-month process. And so we're presenting to them a 5-year, multi-year process of fiscal years where we're going to demonstrate, one, how we're going to realistically grow the economy, how we're going to change our expenditure profiles of the local government, how we're going to be able to have a provision in this process that can accommodate increases of pay to government workers and move services to the public sector across the digital divide. And so this is a process that we're undertaking, and we're not quibbling. We really want folks to be mindful that Mr. Potter and I entered office on January 5th. Today is May the 28th. So that what we're saying is that not even being in office for 6 months, we're developing a path to a better future. We're developing a path to opportunities. We're developing a path to how we have to address many of the issues. The problems of pay are not a problem only in the public sector. We have many folks in the private sector who do not earn a living wage in the territory. A number of them work for companies that are enjoying Economic Development Commission benefits. And so upon my return, the Lieutenant Governor and I are going to sit, and part of our plan is to send a full complement of nominees to the Virgin Islands legislature and reactivate and name the wage board so that we can simultaneously address wages and unlivable wages in the private sector while we concentrate on how we're going to address living wages in the public sector. Are there any more questions? None? I'm sorry, I didn't get your name. Go, please, Jonathan?
Sir, what has been the legal status of your acting and now renominated cabinet since Thursday? There's some question in the law as to whether they had a job between then and now.
They did. They did. What the law requires is that I be notified by the legislature of its action. And when the legislature recessed, meaning they were still in session, that meant that the Secretary of the Senate could not certify the Senate action because nothing prevented a member on the prevailing side to rise a motion for a reconsideration of a nomination, and then the legislature voted in the affirmative. Once the legislature adjourns, then the Secretary of the Legislature, along with its president, will send whatever bills that are passed and whatever actions that are taken pursuant to the Revised Organic Act notifying the governor. Upon the receipt of that written document, then those requirements under the law have been made. While I have not received a certification of a rejection of the nominations, the fact that the legislature has adjourned leaves the Senate Secretary no option but to notify the governor of the rejection. I need not wait until Saturday or Sunday night when the letter arrives to scramble and for the Lieutenant Governor and I to figure out who's going to run what agency. And so in furtherance of the Senate's action, today we nominate and appoint acting commissioners and directors, and two actions are taking place here. We're appointing acting commissioners and directors, and we are sending nominees, literally under the law, new nominees to the legislature, and we begin the process of the 180 days again. I am not restricted by law to do that, and the Senate is not barred for any reconsideration. Now, what I would say to the Virgin Islands and the people of the Virgin Islands is that the Lieutenant Governor and I are going to work in tandem and meet with members of the legislature and meet with the legislature to try and get to an end process on this process. I, for the life of me, do not understand why we are still going through this, given the amount of issues that are affecting the community. There are folks in the community that raise this issue. I believe I heard someone from the Democratic Party, I believe it's state chair, calling for massive strikes and shutdown of government services. So there are those on the fringes that were not there when the pay cuts took place. There were those that are on the fringes today that were not there when 1,800 government workers were laid off. There are those that are there today on the fringes that are shouting when we, as a community, paid someone, unfortunately, suffering with a mental defect, $400,000 a year that almost destroyed one of our hospitals. The point I am trying to make this afternoon is that there is a path forward, and that this administration has made its second step to reach a compromise with the legislature. It is the legislature that said, in response to the conversations with the acting governor, that if you send the letter, we would reconsider the nominees and vote them up. We sent the letter, and the next utterance were, we would take them under advisement. And then the next position is that I don't like what the governor said at the swearing-in St. Croix, because he's trying to make it an inside-outside issue. We are grown adults. I accepted this job knowing that barbs are going to be thrown. I'm going to be criticized by members of the legislature and members of the community. It is a process of conversation. We have demonstrated as an administration over and over our willingness to work with members of the legislature, to work with them individually with their constituent service concerns and collectively as a body. But we seem at a stalemate where progress is being hampered by something for which I nor the Lieutenant Governor can describe.
Could you say whether from this point forward that you'll stick with the $105,000 suggestion, or will they continue to receive the previous salary?
I'm sorry, would you?
How much will you pay them?
We are saying that the nominees that are before the Senate, and this needs to be clarified but carefully understood, the nominee for the Department of Health is receiving the pay that the previous commissioner of the Department of Health receives, which is $129,000. We're not going to cut her pay, because their argument is you got to do what the last administration did. What we're saying is that we're willing to bring the salary caps of those nominees before the Senate now that exceed $105,000 to $105,000. Those that are below $105,000 will remain below $105,000. And the $105,000 figure came not from the legislature, but we chose that number because the legislature's highest paid salary as we know it is $120,000. And then their next pay is $110,000, and then the third is $105,000. And we felt if we went to that level, that because the legislature pay members of their professional staff those numbers, who don't run department and agencies, who don't have hundreds of employees to manage and millions of dollars to articulate and to provide direct public services to the community, that that would be a number that we could coalesce around, solve this issue, and move forward with the business of governance.
Given your effort to make a statement by moving out of the estate, would you mind telling the Director of Property and Procurement to stop trying to find housing for the Lieutenant Governor, which he has said on the record
I can't tell him.
He has done.
No, I can't tell him that. This is the issue of reference points. I'm sorry, I don't know you, and I respect you and the work that you're doing. From the time we were appointing, from the time governors were appointing president, from the time presidents were appointing governors, and governors were appointing government secretaries, meaning long before 1970, the Virgin Islands government provided living quarters for the governor and the government secretary. This is not new. This is our history. We are not the only jurisdiction that provide living quarters for the chief executives or the top of the executive branch of government, given the work that they do. I said it, that we will be presenting a plan for the accommodations of residences for governors and lieutenant governor. When I was lieutenant governor of the Virgin Islands, I lived in government housing. I gave up the government housing on St. Thomas to the Department of Agriculture for the purposes of their administrative offices because of the conditions of the offices they were in at the time. But this is not a creation of the Mapp Potter administration. This goes back almost to the 1960s when we were doing that, and we're not changing that trajectory. Okay? I'd like to thank you so much for tuning into the press conference, and I am sure we will hear much more after today. But again, we ask the members of the legislature to rapidly and with positive consideration ratify our nominees to the cabinet. The members of the legislature continue to speak highly of each of these men and women that we presented before you today, and how they've been doing their jobs, the results, their access to financial information, their ability to call and get responses, and for members of the cabinet to work with them. So it is not an issue of these folks lack the qualifications to do the job. It is an issue of conversation between the executive and the legislature about us exercising our discretion to determine the salaries of members of the cabinet. But in furtherance of the interests of the territory, we have moved and offered what we believe is a more than generous compromise to be able to get to the end so we can move forward with the work that is at hand. Thank you so much.